What is going on, guys? I hope you're doing well and I hope you've successfully passed the previous introduction to functions. This will definitely make your learning process much easier from now on. So now let's get to work and talk about functions in our C programming language. And first of all, what I want to talk about here in this section is that every function has its signature. So we will say that signatures characterizes the function, okay? So a signature characterizes the function. It simply describes the function's name, okay? And it also describes the function's expected parameters list. We will talk about that. And we also said that we can expect that the function may return something. So basically the signature will also specify this one, what will be the returned type of any given function. It will simply say what type of data the function is expected and it's going to return. And its template looks basically like this. First we specify the return type, then we specify the function's name, and lastly, we specify what are the expected parameters that the function should get once it's called. So this structure of first of all the return type, then the function name, and then the parameters list, it's called a signature in our C programming language. That's how we characterize a function, okay? And the main three things to note here are what type of data the function is going to return, okay? So we know that we may have different types of data, right? We have integers, we have floating points, characters, strings, and so on. And what we would like to do is to specify before we are even using any function what will be the type of data that the function is going to return. So for example, the return type can be int, double, char, and so on, okay? Simply specify the type of data that this function is about to return. Just like with the explanation we had in the previous videos where we said that we may think of every function as some guy with some profession, and for this guy the return type basically means what will you expect to receive, what should you receive once the guy, this function, this John in this example, will finish his execution, and what we expect to get in return once it's done, okay? And there is also something new to mention here. There may be functions that will not return anything at all, and that's okay. So in this case, instead of using int, double, or a char as part of the signature when we wanted to return some type or some value, okay, we are going to use void, and that's how it looks like, okay? So void specifies that we do not expect that a function will return anything, okay? We can just call it, for example, a function that all it does is simply to print some information to the screen, to display something. We don't expect to receive something in return from this function, okay? And I've just noticed that I'm saying a lot of times in this video the word okay, so let's stop it, okay? And if we come back to talk about the functions, so one function, John will return an integer and Mary will return nothing, and that's also okay. So now let's talk about the function's name, which is simply the name of the function. You remember John, don't you? And we should give every function a name so that we will be able to distinguish between different functions when we are going to call them. So the function name is very similar to a variable name, and you can name your function however you like. Just don't use any reserved words or something that we cannot use in C, okay? And once again, this okay. And my suggestion for you guys, my tip for you, when you're using functions, never get lazy about naming your functions, and always try to give your functions such a name that will describe its purpose, what it does, in the best possible way. Because you see, as you keep on moving forward and developing much greater programs, you are going to have a lot of functions, and if the naming of them was bad, then you're probably going to experience a lot of difficulties in managing your code, and all of your program is going to become one big mess that you will be that you won't be able even to be capable of reading. And I'm not even talking about further development. So if the function calculates the average of something, make sure that the name will represent at least the fact related to the average. Or if the function is responsible for the like button, let's say that is being used on some social media, make sure that once you read the function's name, you already understand, at least to some extent, what this function does. So, for example, in our previous sections, we've written some code that prints out the minimum and the maximum between given two numbers. So the function name may be at least print min max, okay? It says what this function will do. It will print minimum and maximum. Or maybe if we have some other function that calculates the average grade, then in this case, we will call this function find average grade, okay? So we see the name of the function and we understand what this function mainly does, okay? So the general concept of the function we can guess just by reading its name, and that's very important. And so lastly, we have also the function's expected parameters list, okay? You remember that a function is just like someone with a profession, and whenever you call him to do something, you give him a couple of things. So, for example, if you're using a painter that paints your house, there may be some parameters that we would like to give this painter before he or she starts his or her work, okay? Like the color we want to use, your address, where you live, and how much money can you offer. So I hope that's clear for this example of what parameters a painter may want, okay? So a color, address, money, and so on. Or if there is another example, let's talk about another example where we have a function to print the minimum and the maximum between two numbers, then the function in this case definitely should receive two numbers as parameters, so num1 and num2. And basically once it receives two numbers, it will print the minimum and the maximum between these two, num1 and num2. So to summarize it, every function may include multiple parameters that it will expect to receive once somebody calls it. And this list may also be empty, meaning no parameters at all, and that's okay, it's not mandatory. We may pass a couple of parameters and we may also do not send anything. That's fine. A function does not necessarily should have a list of parameters, but it may have it. So now once we are done with all the formality, we are going to take a look at 4 exercises that each of them is going to use some different type of functions in terms of a return type, and as well as a name, of course, and every function is going to use a different, let's call it a different set of parameters list. I want you to see all, let's say, the standard options for functions that we can have. So basically there are going to be 4 examples, and function number 1 will be with no parameters and nothing that it will return, so it will be of a void type. And this function, all it's going to do is simply to print a greeting message to the screen. So we are going to develop this as our first exercise. Then we are going to take a look at the second function, at function number 2, that will contain some parameters, but it will return nothing, so it still will be of a void type. And what we are going to do in this function, in this second function, is that we are going to receive 2 numbers, num1 and num2, and then print the maximum and the minimum between them to the screen. But it will not return anything, okay? Please note that there is a difference, it's a very important difference that you must understand between returning something, which is an internal functionality between functions, and printing to the screen, which is a totally something different, okay? It simply displays some text on the screen. So make sure you understand the difference because it's crucial for our future sections. And once we are done with function number 2, we are going to proceed to function number 3, where we are going to have no parameters at all, at all, but we will expect to first of all receive something in return once we called this function. So we are going to write a function that gets nothing as a parameter but reads from the user 3 numbers which are going to be local only to this particular function, right? And then the function is going to find out and return the maximum value between these 3 variables or values that we read from the user. And lastly, we are going to take a look at function number 4, which has some parameters, and also we expect that it will return us something. So this function is going to receive 3 grades, okay? It's going to receive your 3 grades, calculate and find out the average grade, and then return it to whoever called it. So as you can see, there is a lot of content, a lot of information that we are going to study and to learn in these exercises, in these variants of functions. And hopefully once we practice this topic a little bit together, you will be able to proceed to other challenges on your own. That's our main goal, to make you prepared for handling things and writing functions on your own. So guys, with that being said, let's move on to solving our examples. I'll see you there.